right, everybody, and of course, good morning to you once again as we welcome you inside brand new hour here on New Era TT Radio, and it is time for exploring Buddhist concepts. And joining us in this space today is Julian Spallmeyer. He's in for Kasi today, and they have that rotation of speakers in between this space. So, Julian, good morning to you. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you, Sir Charles. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning, everybody.
Excellent. Good to have you, man.
Same.
All right. Well, we are here with you and we are listening to you, and it's all yours from here on in as we explore Buddhist concepts.
Okay, thank you. So let's get started. So what I'm going to talk about today in Buddhism is the negative emotions, difficult emotions. And just to kind of start back at the beginning, the main point of Buddhism, the main goal of Buddhism is liberation from suffering, freedom from suffering. So I always kind of like to look at everything from that context, as that's the main purpose of the Buddhist teachings and practices. And so the way that negative emotions fit into that is that the ultimate cause of suffering, according to the Buddhist teachings, is the misperception of the ego or the self, that the self is a continuous entity that goes through life, from birth to death, that there's this I, this subjective entity that is the experiencer, and that there's a dualistic sense that there's an outside world that is separate from us. And so the Buddhist teachings point out that that is an illusion, that sense of that we are, like a solid entity, an ego or a self, and that the self is actually very fluid and changes, not only from childhood to adulthood, but every single moment. Whoever identifies myself is going through changes, both physically and mentally. There's constant change. And so there's not, even though it feels like there's a continuity, and on a gross level there seems to be a continuity, when you get right down to the moment-to-moment experience, there's actually gaps, continual gaps in our experience. And it's kind of an illusion to say that the I that was a 5-year-old child is the same as, the me, the I that is here now. And we all kind of buy into that illusion, but in Buddhism, because it's a misapprehension or a mistaken view, it creates suffering. And one of the main factors in that suffering is the emotions, because the issue with the emotions is that's one of the things that we identify with, that the ego or the self identifies with a particular emotional experience of the world, and that is a big part of one's identity that one kind of holds on to and struggles to maintain. So the Sanskrit word for negative emotions is klesha. The definition of klesha, there's no real word exactly the same in English. So the definition is mental states that cloud the mind and disrupt the equilibrium of the mind and lead to unwholesome actions, which basically creates negative karma. So the negative emotions are basically the source of negative actions. They're all, negative actions are always based on negative emotions that trigger them. The translation is usually defilements, afflictive emotions, negative emotions, mind poisons. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah, so far everything is good, Julian. Go ahead.
Okay, thanks.
Coming through very clear, actually.
Okay, great. So the negative emotions are a big part of ourselves that create and maintain that illusion of a continuous self. And the three main root kleshas or negative emotions are ignorance, attachment, and aversion. So ignorance is the actual most root, the fundamental source of confusion, because that is where we ignore the truth of what is, and we fall into the delusion of a separate self and the dualistic experience of the world. So that comes out of ignorance, ignoring the actual reality. And then in terms of the negative emotions, ignorance is manifest as indifference, kind of a dullness or lack of clarity. Attachment has to do with a sense of wanting something, and desiring and wanting to hold on to and clinging to an object. So again, it's a dualistic sense of experiencing a desire or a wishing for somebody or something, and then becoming attached to that. And then aversion is the opposite. It's pushing away, saying no, being aggressive, and whatever's you experience externally is more of a threat, so you're pushing it away. Attachment is that you're attracted to something in the external world. Aversion is where you feel threatened by it. So if you think of, in this kind of very primitive initial experience of the kleshas, it's, in fact, I would say it's before it even becomes a negative emotion. It's just a simple automatic response to stimuli. If you think of a baby has not yet developed, the ability to create narratives and belief systems and ideas about, who they are, and they're simply reacting emotionally to whatever experience comes in. And so when a baby sees a nipple, a baby smiles and wants that, is attracted to it. When a baby sees the injection needle and getting pricked, the baby says no and starts screaming, and it's negative, so pushing away. And then these emotions usually last very briefly. Once they're satisfied, the baby falls back into the what one could say is more of an indifferent, neutral state, and is just kind of lying there. So these three energies are very, very natural and spontaneous, and not a problem essentially in a baby, because they haven't really developed a sense of the illusory self at this point. But as we grow into adults, these initial emotional responses are solidified into much more fully blown emotions. And so attachment, the wanting or the neediness, the clinging and the wanting to possess, is manifest in such emotions as clinging, desire, lust, greed, neediness, craving. All those kind of feelings are a manifestation of attachment as a negative emotion. Aversion would be, again, saying no to what, feeling threatened, turns into hatred, aggression, paranoia, destructiveness, combativeness, maliciousness, and rejecting whatever's, in one's environment. And then ignorance, which is more of a kind of a whatever, no big deal kind of experience, manifests as indifference, delusion, a sense of numbness or dullness, kind of a lack of clarity, a lack of curiosity, just kind of like, kind of a boring kind of state of mind. So those are how the three negative emotions develop as the three core emotions, and then those will ultimately develop into much more complex emotions, which I'll talk about. But ignorance is the ultimate source of confusion, and it prevents the mind from apprehending reality as it is. And so that then triggers attachment and aversion, and attachment and aversion trigger the more full-blown emotional states. And then those trigger unskillful or negative actions. And that's what creates karma, which is, in Buddhism, that is the actions that rebound on us, whether negative or positive, depending on, what we do. So with these negative emotions, there's always a veil between the way things appear and the way things actually are, because we're already filtering our experience through these emotions. We're seeing the world through aggression, or through passion, or through indifference, through paranoia. If you think of somebody who's paranoid, it's like every experience that they have is twisted into like a threat or something negative, or you have to watch out for everybody and everything as a possible threat. So that's a particular experience of the world that is distorted. Not to say it's never accurate, but with somebody who's very paranoid, they project that on everything. So these are mental states that we can actually get trapped in and view the world through. And ultimately cause suffering for both ourselves and others. So to get into a bit more detail with aversion, initially it's a very automatic response of, feeling threatened and pushing away, being combative. That can turn into hatred. So hatred is based on anger and fear, and it turns into maliciousness, ill will, the impulse to cause harm, to destroy, and eventually, anytime we're holding a grudge against somebody, that is an expression of this kind of solidified stance, emotional stance of experiencing that person in a very, definite way as being either negative or a threat, somebody we don't like. And the thing with this is, we can hold a grudge against somebody throughout our lives. Some people, like, even if it's a sibling or, previous friend, they did something bad to us one time, and then for a lifetime after that, you're holding a grudge against them. You have this negative hatred or aversion towards that person. And the problem is that you're no longer open to, the actual situation of what might be happening, where that person may not deserve that projection at all, or at least not to that extent or for that length of time, because people always change. People go through changes, and somebody who you might experience as a negative, at one point, may 10 years later show up and be completely different, completely changed in a different space. So we have to be open to that. So anytime we're holding a grudge against somebody, that's an example of how emotions can really trap us into a certain state of mind. Sometimes anger might feel satisfying in the moment. Some people get off on feeling hatred and anger towards others. But the point is that when that happens, it really poisons the mind and, creates suffering for ourselves and also for the other person. So ultimately, that's the source of not just individual human beings, but whole societies and nations being in conflict with each other. And ultimately, that's what leads to wars, when one gives up any possibility of negotiation or working things out and goes to the extreme of warfare against another culture, another nation. We still see that happening. It's amazing that is continuing in this world. So the second negative emotion is greed, greed or craving, attachment. And the basic energy behind that is I want, I desire, I need. And it appears to be harmless, but it is based on the painful feeling of internally not having enough, that we don't have a sense of fullness and sense of completion internally in ourselves. And so we need to fill ourselves up with external things in order to feel whole, in order to feel good. It could be a relationship with a partner. It could be, accumulation of wealth, accumulation of property, accumulation of things, furniture, paintings, houses, whatever. But this sense of accumulating and getting more and more, because you're never satisfied, because you don't have an internal sense of richness. You have to always seek that from the outside, and it's never ending. Also, with this cliche of attachment, the I wanting can actually start creating harm when we start acting it out negatively. An example of that would be stealing or seducing somebody that isn't interested in you, trying to seduce somebody. And to get whatever we crave, we need to have it. We need to have it. And that can lead to suffering. In the extreme, culturally, you see attachment manifesting as consumerism, a consumerism mentality that is always trying to accumulate things, more and more stuff, as a way to feel full, but feeling empty inside, so never actually satisfied. And the third negative emotion, ignorance, to go into more detail about that, it's the source of all the other negative emotions ultimately. And what's going on is that we've lost track with how to be happy, how to feel happiness. So we could say it in terms of we're not knowing how to find happiness for ourselves, because we don't recognize our true nature, which is already, basically good. So this underlies the arising of the other two negative emotions, but it manifests in itself, as I said before, a kind of a neutral state. It's not really hurting anybody or causing harm directly, but it's a kind of a stagnation, a kind of a dullness, a numbness, and not really experiencing the world clearly and fully. This ignorance is actually the most difficult of the negative emotions to overcome, because by definition, we are unaware of it. We lack the clarity to be aware that we have that we are ignorant. So it's basically a not knowing. So then you have all the complex emotions that arise out of these three core emotions. And this would include, jealousy, which is usually a mixture of, passion and attachment mixed together with anger and aggression. So aversion and attachment are both mixed up in jealousy. Pride, which is another of the negative emotions, is a mixture of attachment and ignorance. And then there's a lot of complex emotions that they talk about more in today's modern world, and you don't really see these conditions so much in the traditional Buddhist texts. But thinking of things like anxiety, which is probably when people talk about what their issue is right now, I'm anxious, I have too much anxiety, too much stress. And I think that's because in today's world, there's just so many things that create stress for us. And we're not necessarily feeling a physical threat of being killed, or being physically hurt, which, the human organism is built to, meet that kind of threat. But what's going on is a much more kind of abstract threats that are going on continually, of fear of death, fear of losing a relationship, fear of losing our job, fear of losing our income, that kind of ongoing stress, or just the stress of driving and traffic, all these kind of things create anxiety. Again, another difficult emotion to overcome, but one that is very, very much helped by meditation. So if anybody here is interested in meditation, doing meditations on like a body scan or breathing techniques are really, I find, the best way to work with anxiety. Another modern emotion that's not talked about so much in the tradition literature is boredom. And my view is that boredom increases with the more sources of entertainment that we have at our fingertips. That, you know, in the old days when people didn't have TVs and radios and computers and smartphones and all that, and they just lived in a more natural environment, they were, I think, much more at peace with simply just being in whatever environment they're in and not needing extra stimuli. Whereas today, when we have so many things at our command, at our fingertips, it's like if there's a moment or two when we don't have that stimulus, that entertainment coming in, we get bored, we get antsy, we get restless. So there's a real correlation, I think, between the more sources of entertainment we have and the more we're susceptible to boredom. And boredom can be experienced as quite, some people think it's the most horrible emotion possible, rather than that just simply relaxing and being, you know, with whatever's going on in the environment. So are there any questions at this point? I've talked about, you know, the different negative emotions, and the idea is that, you know, we can become too identified with a particular one. You know, we go through all the emotions, but most of us, our view of the world is through the filter of a particular style, a particular emotional style. Either it could be through a sense of dissatisfaction and wanting more and looking outwardly for satisfaction, or it could be the aversion stance of, you know, feeling like the world is kind of threatening and always seeing the world through that lens of, you know, some kind of danger or stress. And, you know, everything coming towards us is a threat. So there are extremes, you know, in this area, and then there's kind of a more day-to-day level of these things. But the idea is that with that illusory sense of self, it usually attaches to a particular emotional stance or view of the world, and then kind of sees to that filter as a way of maintaining the self, the illusion of the self. And it doesn't have to be a pleasant experience. It often is, like I say, a negative experience of the world. But just that familiarity of it is more, the familiarity of it is more sustaining than being open to what's really happening in the world. You know, seeing things clearly as they are, which is too much uncertainty, basically. So the different remedies for working with these negative emotions is, the basic idea is that it has to be done internally. We have to kind of come back to ourselves. We tend to be, in our dualistic, you know, framework, we tend to be too focused on the external. That externalities are what are causing our suffering. And in Buddhism, the idea is that that's not so, that it's always our internal response or reaction that is creating the problem. And we tend to react emotionally, and then we get stuck in that emotion. And we kind of fuel it, we feed it, we build on it, rather than kind of letting emotions just come and go naturally. So one remedy is, in Buddhism, is a training to cultivate mindfulness and awareness through meditation practice. And through that, we recognize emotions as they arise. And if we can recognize them, because one of the problems is sometimes we feel we're angry and we don't even know it, you know, or we're depressed and we don't know it. We don't have enough self-awareness to really pick up on what's going on inside. So with meditation practice, we develop much more awareness of our emotional state. They call it emotional intelligence in the psychotherapy world. And so once you're aware that you have anger arising or lust or whatever it is, you can actually make a decision to take a pause and not react to it or not act on it. The example would be somebody makes you angry and you immediately you want to punch them, you want to hit them. And with meditation, you learn to be able to slow things down enough that you're able to resist that impulse to lash out, to create negative karma by lashing out. So you decide not to react. And then once you've decided not to get hooked by the emotion, you're able to respond in a much more reasonable way without, the emotional charge. Emotions are very strong. And if you don't react, you can just see them come and go. You have to add fuel to a fire in order to keep a fire alive. So it's the same with emotions. If we let the emotion just arise, feel passion for somebody, we want a person, and then we feel like we have to. This is what I need to do to get them, and you start strategizing and all that. That is feeding the fire. It's fueling it, adding fuel to the fire. If you just let a sense of attraction arise in yourself, and then let it be there, and then it just kind of goes away by itself. It doesn't feel like you have to act on it in an aggressive way. So the same with anger. The first sensation of anger is often natural and spontaneous and could be justified. For instance, if you see, somebody abusing a child, the immediate reaction is to feel angry and to want to stop that behavior, to do something to stop it. And that is completely justified expression of anger. But then if that leads on to you holding a grudge, feeding the anger, wanting to take it further, that's where it gets into more neurotic expression. Pretty much any emotion that arises quickly burns out by itself if you don't feel it. And the idea with this is not to cause harm. If you have an emotion arising and we choose not to act on it or react negatively, then we are preventing, further harm being caused. So, I want to give, examples of that with, beings that do not have the more complex kind of ego structure that adult humans have. And if you think about animals, like say a horse in a field and it hears a noise and it gets spooked and the ears go up and maybe it runs away and there's kind of a fight or flight reaction. If it turns out that the noise was nothing and there's no threat, that emotion disappears almost immediately within minutes, if not seconds. And then a few minutes later, the horse is grazing in the grass again like nothing happened. Or if you think about a small child who has not yet developed the whole story-making, belief system, cognitive thinking, analyzing, and creating narratives about, who I am and what's happening in the world. So a small child is also just pretty much driven by these very primitive emotions. And I had the experience of being in a bus the other day with a family that had a small 3-year-old child, little girl. And the girl was playing and happy and, excitable and having a great time and just, really having fun. But got a little bit out of control, so the parent had to strap the child into the seat on the bus. Immediately, the child started bawling and screaming and wailing and crying. And loud, loud, loud for so, and unstoppable. But the parents just kind of let it wear itself out, and then within a few minutes, the child had stopped and had kind of settled back into neutral. And then a few minutes later, the child is laughing and, happy again. So the child goes through these emotions just very naturally, doesn't hold on to them, doesn't really even remember probably what happened a few minutes before. So all those kind of cognitive abilities, intellectual and more abstract abilities that adults have aren't present in children. So you never get this really solid sense of ego clinging. But in adults, if we have an experience of being extremely happy or, kind of excitable and happy, we feed it. We drink or we do drugs or we, do things to kind of keep it going. Or if we get really angry, we hold a grudge, we hold on to it, we create a storyline or a narrative to justify it. And this is where that negative sense of self becomes problematic and creates a lot of suffering. The second remedy is when we see the emotions arising, we choose to focus the mind on the opposite. So say there's somebody in our lives who is making us angry, they're doing things to make us angry, and our first impulse is to lash out, to react. If you can take a pause and take a moment to let go of that and switch over to feeling love and compassion for that person. Now, this takes practice. It's not easy, but generally speaking, when people are angry and attacking and acting negatively, it's because beneath that, there's a lot of suffering going on. There's a lot of negative experiences that they're experiencing. And so we can be the most helpful to them, not by fighting back and doing it, excuse me, doing a kind of a tit for tat build up. Excuse me a sec.
All right, so people, remember you are listening to Exploring Buddhist Concepts right here on New Era TT Radio. And in a short while, we will also invite you to join us. If you have any questions or if there's anything you would like to find out or what we were talking about is something that you would like to get a little more expression on in a short, we will also invite you in between there. All right. Juliana, you all right now?
You had a tickle in my throat, sorry.
Yeah. I know how that feels. That happens to me quite a bit.
Yeah. So in this case, where the impulse is to react negatively, rather than that, you step back, you kind of return to your own experience, and you recognize, this is relies on a certain amount of practice to get to this place where you can actually feel compassion for somebody that you feel negatively towards or who's acting out negatively, that you can recognize that is coming from their own suffering. And therefore, once you open up to that, recognize that, you can respond to them in a way that is more from a compassionate place. Now, it doesn't necessarily be nice, you could still have firm limits and, be very straightforward and so on, but you're not attacking back. You're actually acting in a way that respects them as a human being, and you're being constructive. So the third remedy is to understand that all these emotions arise from our mind. Ultimately, they're not coming from the outside. The emotions that arise within us. There may be a trigger externally, but the whole point of practice in Buddhism is that we work with ourselves. We cannot change what's happening outside so much, but we can work on ourselves. And if we have anger or passion arising within us, we can simply kind of work with that internally. And notice that they arise within us like waves rising in the ocean, and then they fall back into the ocean. They come and go, they don't have to affect us, they don't have to be overwhelming, and we don't have to identify with them and be consumed by them. That is a choice. So, just to summarize, to finish up, um, all the Buddhist teachings, all the Buddhist schools teach that through shamatha practice or calm abiding practice, which is the introductory meditation practice, the negative emotions can be pacified. What I mean by that is through the meditation practice, we learn to recognize them as they arise, not get overwhelmed by them. But once we see them, recognize them, then we can let them go. We don't have to fuel them and feed them. And so the calm abiding meditation practice really helps us to pacify the emotions so they don't take over. We don't get hooked by them. And therefore, as a result, we stop reacting to them, and it reduces the harm that we cause in the world because we're not reacting or acting out based on the emotion. So that's the calm abiding meditation practice. But in Buddhism, the more advanced practice and the practice that the Buddha actually developed is called vipassana or insight meditation. And it is through insight practice, the meditation, that the true nature of the negative emotions and the mind itself are understood and unveiled, revealed. And when the empty nature of the self, seeing the self as not a solid entity, but as a very fluid, moment to moment unraveling. So seeing the empty nature of the self is fully recognized. It is no longer the root for the negative emotions to be attached to them. And so the negative emotions lose their power to distract the mind. So the image that's often given in the Buddhist teachings is when we develop that vipassana or wisdom awareness, which is a much more expansive, spacious, open awareness, we experience the mind a lot differently. And so when emotions arise, it's really like seeing clouds arising in the sky and knowing that they will dissolve back into the sky. We already know that. We already have that experience. And so we identify more with the sky, the more infinite, open aspect, and not attached to the clouds as they come and go. And once we can do that, we're no longer, overwhelmed and distracted and caught up and hooked by the emotions. So that is it's a more advanced practice, but it's kind of where we're going in terms of dismantling the whole ego illusion completely. So that's my talk for today, and I welcome any questions or discussion, not only on this topic, but any topic in Buddhism that people are interested in.
Okay. Well, people, the lines are open to you. So you can call us at 281-1315. Yeah, let's work at that one for now. 281-1315, 299-5156. You have two lines, either which way. You can regular call us, you can WhatsApp call us. Yeah, but just give us a call. It's Exploring Buddhist Concepts. And we are talking today with Julian Stolmeyer. Julian, in mentioning and listening to what you're talking about, and something just piqued my curiosity in the sense that when you compare as a child, how you move past things, but yet as an adult, we hold on to so many different things.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think is responsible for that? What it is as a child we are able to let go of, and as we grow, that I don't know if it's like if certain things just become more valuable to us, and we feel like we have to hold on to those things more and just can't let go of it.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I'm also a psychologist, so I've studied a lot of child development. And in child development, basically the first mental experiences that the child have, you could look at it also from the point of view of the different parts of the brain. You know, the most primitive part is the brain stem, and then you have the limbic system, which is the emotional center, and then you have the cortex, the frontal cortex, which is more abstract, intellectual, executive functioning, going on. So a child or most animals have, are mostly responding initially from very direct emotional response. Either, the amygdala is part of the limbic system, and that's triggers fight or flight and those very basic emotions. And so a child has not yet developed that frontal cortex part of the brain where you have reason thinking, you have intellect, you have cognitive thinking, you have abstract thinking, you have memory.
Mm-hmm.
Memory is more developed, and what's called executive functioning, which is, where we can make decisions. We can actually make decisions, and we have belief systems. We have narratives going on about what the truth is, and that develops at a later age. And so a child doesn't have those structures that create, more of a prolonged experience of whatever they're experiencing. It's just emotion after emotion after emotion. And the emotion comes and goes, and the child isn't really that bothered by it. Well, unless it's, a very negative kind of environment. But that's where a child learns resilience and how to go through pain and pleasure. And they don't really create much more of a sense of self that is, solidified at that point. That comes in more when the frontal cortex is developed, and you have more possibility to create narratives, to create storylines about who I am and the way things are in the world. And then you have political beliefs, you have personal beliefs, you hold grudges because you have memory. So all those things develop at a later age.
Yeah.
The capacity to mess yourself up basically increases.
Yeah, I suppose that as it develops in good, and it also develops in negative ways.
Yeah, yeah. There's not obviously there's nothing negatively intrinsically bad about developing cognitive skills, but they do create these, potentially create very distorted views of the world because you're not experiencing reality as it is. You're experiencing it through your your cognitive filters and your emotional filters, and that can be quite distorted.
Mhm. All
That's
right.
that's why you could become very centralized in paranoia, and you see everything through that filter.
Yes, yeah. All right. Well, if anything, we can leave it there for today, Julian. Any thing that you would like to share just before we go?
Um, Not really. I mean, I don't know if Kasi has shared with you that we have a WhatsApp group where we let people know about all the different talks that we give and meditation groups that we have. But if you like, I could share that with you, and
Yeah,
you could share it
yeah.
to your audience.
You
Yeah.
can. You can go ahead.
Okay. What you need to do would be to WhatsApp me on my phone number, and I'll WhatsApp you back basically my phone number so that people could contact me, and I would add them to the WhatsApp group.
Okay. Well, you can share that number with them if you feel so.
Yeah, it's 783-3791.
783
Yes,
3791.
yes.
All right.
And we also have a Facebook page, Bodhicharya TT, which also has that information.
Okay. Beautiful. All right. Well, thanks so much for linking up with us today on Exploring Buddhist Concepts. And I'm sure, well, I look forward to the next time that you're on.
Okay, great. Thank you, Sir Charles. My pleasure.
May I be filled with loving kindness. May I be well. May I be peaceful and at ease. May I be happy. May you be filled with loving kindness. May you be well. May you be peaceful and at ease. May you be happy. May we be filled with loving kindness. May we be well. May we be peaceful and at ease.
Wake up with the NETT Radio Breakfast Show. Rise and shine with Wendell Stevens and Richard Raghuvarsing, weekdays, from 6 o'clock to 9 a.m. Start your day feeling good, energized, and informed as we tackle the biggest